Before you try to understand anything, do something first, don't think. In front of you there is a butterfly, not as a concept, not as a metaphor you analyze, but as a movement you notice. Do not compare colors. Do not ask what it represents. Do not wonder what your choice says about you. Simply observe which butterfly draws your attention without effort. Because the moment you start thinking about change, you are already far from understanding it. Alan Watts often pointed out that the human mind is deeply confused about transformation. We imagine change as something dramatic, something we must force, something that happens after struggle. But nature does not work that way. The butterfly does not try to transform, it does not improve itself, it does not plan its becoming. It changes because change is what life does. When you choose a butterfly instinctively, you are not revealing where you are going. You are revealing how you relate to change right now. Most people believe they are afraid of change, but Watts would say that what we truly fear is not change itself. It is the illusion of permanence breaking down. We cling to identities, roles, stories about who we are, and we call that stability. But stability is not stillness. It is movement, pretending to be solid. The butterfly exposes this illusion gently. It was never separate from the caterpillar. There was no moment when one became the other. There was only continuous transformation. If this butterfly caught your attention, there may be something in you that is beginning to see through the idea that you must become someone else to change your life. Perhaps you have been waiting for the right version of yourself, more disciplined, more confident, more healed. But Watts would smile at this and say, the self you are waiting to become is the same self doing the waiting. The butterfly does not escape what it was. It expresses what was already unfolding. Notice how light it appears, not because it is fragile, but because it is not resisting what it is. Much of what we call suffering comes from resisting the fact that life is always in transition. We want guarantees before we move, certainty before we allow ourselves to live fully. But the butterfly never asks if the air will hold it. It simply opens its wings. Your immediate attraction may reveal something subtle, a readiness to stop forcing change and start allowing it, or perhaps a quiet longing to do so. You may feel drawn to the butterfly because something in you is tired of self-improvement as struggle, tired of constant fixing, tired of believing that transformation requires pressure. Watts taught that the universe is not a thing that changes, it is a process. And you are not inside that process, you are that process happening where you are. So pause. Hold the image of the butterfly you noticed first. Do not move ahead yet. Ask nothing. Explain nothing. Simply notice what it feels like to imagine change without effort. Before we continue, anchor this awareness gently. In the comments, write this short phrase, I allow change to unfold, not as a promise, not as a demand, but as recognition. And if this kind of reflection resonates with you, subscribe, not for answers, but for reminders that transformation is not something you chase, but something you notice. In the next part, we will explore why the mind creates the illusion of change as effort, and how the butterfly reveals a radically different way of understanding growth, identity, and becoming. For now, remain still. Let the wings move, and do nothing else. Now let us look more closely, not by dissecting the butterfly, but by noticing what your mind does around the idea of change. Alan Watts often observed that the human mind turns change into a project, something to manage, something to control, something that must be justified with effort, timelines, and proof. This is where confusion begins. You tell yourself, I will change when I'm ready, or I need to become stronger before I can move forward, or one day I'll be different. But notice what is hidden inside these thoughts. They all assume that there is a fixed you standing still, waiting to transform later. The butterfly quietly dissolves this assumption. It does not leave one state and enter another, as if crossing a border. There is no sharp line between what it was and what it is. Change is not an event. It is continuity misunderstood. Watts explained that the ego loves to imagine itself as a permanent observer watching life happen, but this is an illusion. There is no separate observer behind the scenes. The observer is the movement. So when you say, I need to change, who exactly is the one who will change? And who is the one waiting for that change to occur? The mind ties itself into knots here. The butterfly does not. If this symbol attracted you, it may reveal a growing awareness that your struggle with change is not about transformation, it is about identity, about clinging to an image of yourself that feels solid, even if it feels uncomfortable. We often hold on to familiar suffering because it feels known, predictable, safer than uncertainty. Watts would say that this is like refusing to let a river flow because you prefer the shape of yesterday's current. The illusion of change is believing that transformation must feel like rupture, like losing yourself, like becoming someone else entirely. But the butterfly shows something subtler. Nothing was lost, nothing was abandoned, nothing was forced. What changed was expression. This is deeply unsettling for the mind because it means there is no moment when you finally arrive, no final version of yourself to achieve, no stable ground to cling to. And yet, this is where freedom begins. When you stop demanding that change justify itself, life moves naturally. When you stop measuring progress, growth unfolds without resistance. You may notice that much of your anxiety about change comes from trying to control outcomes. You want to know who you will be on the other side. You want reassurance before you open your wings. But the butterfly never asks the air what will happen next. It flies not because it knows where it's going, but because flying is what it does. If this resonates with you, it may explain why forcing change has felt exhausting, why self-improvement sometimes feels heavy instead of alive, why motivation rises and falls, but peace remains elusive. Watts would gently point out that peace does not come from becoming better, it comes from seeing through the illusion that you are unfinished. This does not mean stagnation. It means movement without self-violence. You still grow, you still evolve, but not from rejection of who you are now. The butterfly does not despise the caterpillar. It fulfills it. Pause again. Notice where in your life you are trying to push change instead of allowing it, where you are demanding certainty before movement, where you are postponing life until you feel ready. These patterns are not mistakes. They are habits of the thinking mind. Before we continue, mark this realization gently. In the comments, write this phrase, "I stop forcing change," not as a resolution, as awareness. And if this perspective continues to resonate, if it feels like relief rather than pressure, subscribe, not to become something new, but to keep remembering that life is already moving through you. In the next part, we will explore how the illusion of change shapes fear, resistance, and the constant feeling of almost arriving, and how the butterfly reveals a way of living without waiting for the future to begin. For now, stay still. Let the idea of becoming loosen and allow movement to happen on its own. There is another illusion hidden inside the idea of change. It is the illusion of later. Alan Watts often pointed out that the human mind is addicted to postponement. We imagine life as something that will truly begin after we improve, after we heal, after we figure ourselves out. And so we live in rehearsal. The butterfly exposes how strange this is. It does not live as if its real life begins after the next transformation. It does not hover in anticipation. It lives where it is fully, even though it is constantly changing. When you feel drawn to the butterfly, it may reveal a subtle exhaustion with waiting, waiting to be ready, waiting to be different, waiting for permission to inhabit your own life. Many people are not afraid of change. They are afraid of now, because now has no guarantees. The future feels safer because it is imaginary. You can project control into it. You can believe that someday things will make sense. But the cost of living in the future is disconnection from the present. Watts would say that this is why so many people feel as if they are always almost there, almost fulfilled, almost aligned, almost free. The finish line keeps moving. The butterfly never arrives at a final form, and yet it is never incomplete. This is difficult for the mind to accept. The mind wants a conclusion, a stable identity, a moment when effort ends and certainty begins. But life does not offer conclusions, only transitions. If this resonates with you, You may notice how often you measure yourself against an imagined version of who you should be. More evolved, more confident, more at peace. And every comparison subtly tells you, this moment is not enough yet. Watts would gently laugh at this and say, if the present moment were ever incomplete, nothing could ever complete it, because there is nowhere else for life to happen. The butterfly does not ask whether it is doing transformation correctly. It does not question its timing. It does not doubt its unfolding. It moves because movement is happening. There is a deep relief in seeing this. It means you do not need to solve yourself before living. You do not need to finalize your identity before expressing it. You do not need to eliminate uncertainty to move forward. Change is not something you step into later. It is what is happening as you read these words. And resistance to change often shows up as restlessness, impatience, or the feeling that something is missing. But nothing is missing. What is missing is attention to what is already here. If the butterfly called to you, it may be pointing to this simple truth. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not unfinished. You are in motion. And motion does not need justification. Pause again. Notice where you keep postponing presence, where you keep telling yourself, when I become X, then I'll allow myself to live. This is not self-awareness, it is self-delay. Before we move to the final integration, anchor this insight gently. In the comments, write this phrase, I live where I am, not as a declaration of mastery, as a return. And if this way of seeing feels like release instead of effort, subscribe, not to follow a path, but to remember that life is not waiting for you to change before it begins. In the final part, we will bring everything together, not to explain transformation, but to dissolve the illusion that you were ever separate from it. For now, remain still. Let the future soften, and allow the present to breathe. Now, let everything rest, not into an answer, not into a conclusion, but into recognition. Alan Watts often said that the moment you stop trying to change yourself, something far more interesting happens. You begin to notice that change was never separate from you in the first place. The butterfly was never a destination. It was never a goal. It was a reminder that transformation is not a journey from one identity to another, but a continuous unfolding that only feels dramatic when the mind tries to hold still. When you stop thinking about change, you notice something quietly radical. There is no solid point where you end and life begins. No fixed self waiting to be improved. No future version that will finally make everything make sense. There is only this movement, appearing as you. The illusion of change collapses when you see that what you call becoming is simply life expressing itself in a new form. Nothing is added. Nothing is removed. The butterfly does not leave the past behind. It does not carry it forward. It simply is what is happening now. And so are you. This understanding does not make you passive. It makes you intimate with life. When you stop forcing transformation, action becomes natural. Decisions arise without tension. Growth happens without self-violence. You stop asking, how do I change? And begin noticing what is already moving. From this place, effort softens. You still act, but action no longer comes from rejection of the present. It comes from participation in it. Watts would say this is the art of living, not manipulating life into a preferred shape, but dancing with its rhythm as it unfolds. This changes how you relate to uncertainty. Uncertainty stops feeling like a problem to solve. It becomes the space where life breathes. You stop waiting for clarity before moving. Clarity arises as you move. And like the butterfly, you discover that lightness does not come from escaping weight. It comes from not resisting motion. So take this with you. When you feel the urge to fix yourself, pause. When you feel behind, notice movement. When you feel lost, remember that nothing moving can be lost. Life is not asking you to become someone else. It is inviting you to notice what is already becoming. Before you go, anchor this gently. In the comments, write this final phrase, I am part of the movement, not as an identity, as recognition. And if this way of seeing resonates, if it feels like relief instead of pressure, subscribe. Not to improve yourself, but to keep remembering that life does not need to be forced to change. It is already happening. It always was. And like the butterfly, you were never late, only in motion.